Can you hear me okay? This is, we're continuing. Sometimes we'll interspace it with other things, but we've been talking and preaching on the commands of Christ. In this one, this is the seventh one on the list that I'm using, but it's sort of out of place. I wanted to address this one because it's one we haven't talked about a lot. It's brought up a lot in secular conversations just because of a phrase that it represents, but it's not really practiced or talked about as much as I think it should, because it's sort of a foundation of Christ's teachings. But we'll be working out of Matthew 5, 38 through 48. That's where most of this is going to be coming from. But I wanted to start off with talking about our relationships with other people, brothers and sisters, and those in the world. Often what passes for love is little more than, to many of us, it can be described as a neat business transaction, because that's the way we treat it. People are kind to us, so we repay them with equal consideration. When they threaten us unjustly or negatively, our response is really what they asked for, isn't it? When it's a negative response from our side, because we're replying in kind. Everything is so balanced and so fair, so logical with this eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth type of justice that we are so familiar with. But I was reading a quote from this periodical that I read sometimes called Daily Bread, and this one gentleman just described it as, but Christian love never settles for only what's reasonable. It insists on giving mercy as well as justice. It breaks the chain of logical worldly reactions. And that's what Christian love is supposed to do. So we're introduced to the thought of this new set of commands. And the ones I want to go over, the main one, is surrounded by, before and after, by some other commands that Christ gives. In verse 28, we read, "You've heard that it is said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And we're all familiar with that one. And we've talked about it before in class and stuff. But even people who don't know the Bible are familiar with that phrase, and they use it. Sometimes they live by that. It's a standard justice. But in most cases, they completely misinterpret what the meaning of that is when it was used in the Old Testament. And most Christians misinterpret it. They think that it gives them the right to retaliate for injuries against themselves and their loved ones. And when this law was given in Deuteronomy, and this was in Deuteronomy 19:21, if you want to look at it sometime, that's when it's given. This was intended by God to limit vengeance, retaliation. It wasn't to say, if someone does this to you, you go do this to them in equal measure. That's not what this law was about. It was about to, because of your initial reaction and response, to limit you to a certain reaction. Did not mean that you were expected to do this reaction or to come back on someone with equal measure. Matter of fact, it would have been better if you didn't. But if you're going to do this, this is the limit of it. It had to be equal. It could not be more. God's intent was to limit this. Under Old Testament law, retributions were limited to that which was equivalent to the loss. So if someone stole my 150-pound hog, then he had to give me another 150-pound hog. If someone robbed me of $10, they had to repay me that $10, not $50, not more than that, or even ask something else in recompense. It had to be the same thing. Given an opportunity, human nature, to retaliate for hurt that is done to us most of the time, people will usually over-retaliate. They usually go above and beyond to make sure, that it counts, right? They actually try to make the offender suffer more than the level than they were harmed at. The seventh command in our commands of Christ that we're talking about actually occurs in Matthew 5:41. "And whosoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. The verb translated go, hupage, is an imperative present active. This is a command as well. This is not a suggestion. This is a command. And so in this section, all of these are from the Sermon on the Mount. The Lord is calling us to a new level of response to people, to the men and women around us, to the people that we live with and interact with, to our brothers and sisters. And I want you to notice how we're told to respond to these personal slights, insults, trespasses that are brought against us. So look at me with these. These are 4 worldly postures, or I'm going to say responses to things when it comes to these type of slights against us and bad words and harsh speaking to us, people that treat us badly. These are 4 responses to that. I'm going to refer to them as postures because we set ourselves up for this type of response. And I'm going to give you the 4 Christ-like responses, the way we should be responding to them. The first posture is, which I think is the most common, and the one we most respond to and immediately instinctively go to is you're going to pay for that. Somebody does something to you, the immediate response a lot of times is, oh boy, you're going to pay for that. And that can come in a myriad of ways and whatever your thought process is and depending on how creative you are. But that is, in a nutshell, what the response is. The Christian response is we are to take this insult or this trespass with grace and respond with kindness. And that's completely opposite of what our reaction and instinct is. And Christ said, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. Now that is a direct command as well. I tell you, do not resist an evil person. First, we're told that we're not to resist an evil person, but what does that mean? What plays into that? Jesus' illustrations and his personal examples of this depict not the weakling, because Christ was no way a weak person. Paul was not a weak person. This is not the attitude and the actions of a weak person. This is someone that is strong and has the ability, but who has control of himself or herself and loves others so powerfully that he rejects absolutely every form of retaliation. Now, Paul's words found in Romans 12:17 and 21, these are commentaries on this very teaching of Jesus. And Paul says, and he's just saying it another way, repay no one evil for evil. Verse 21, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Matthew 5:39, but whoever slaps your right cheek, turn the other to him also. Now, I don't know if you paid attention to this before, but you look in your translation, and Christ's words mean things. We have to pay attention sometimes, and it's easy to, when you're reading Scripture or anything, you don't make note of certain things, or it just doesn't stand out or catch you. But what's important in this statement that is often overlooked is Christ is very specific. He says, whoever slaps you on your right cheek. And I'm going to get to what's important about that, because this is one of the most misunderstood and misinterpreted phrases in the whole Bible, with the commands of Christ. People take this so wrong. We probably all heard it paraphrased this way. The Bible says when someone slaps you on the cheek that you turn the other cheek. But if he slaps you again, it doesn't say what you have to do then. That, of course, is also missing the point. People have used this to justify everything from pacifism to nonviolent protests, all kinds of myriad things that they will not respond at all to it, and they think it all has to do with a physical act, but it doesn't. At its core, this passage doesn't deal with physical violence at all. It has nothing to do with it, really. The slap that's described here, in this culture, and this is where we have to go to, and Christ was very specific about it being the right cheek. In this culture at the time, this was a very serious insult. It wasn't intended to harm you. It wasn't a physical blow. It was an insult. Even today, slapping a man across the face, especially on the right cheek, is an insult that is so grievous in most of the Middle Eastern countries. In fact, it's not just a slap. What we would refer to it, and what Christ is describing here, is what is called a backhand or a back slap. And even today, when we use in this country, if you were to back slap someone or backhand them, your intent was not to harm them. Your intent was to actually probably demoralize or insult them. Most of the world's right-handed. So you would have to be a contortionist if you're a left-handed person to give this insult. So even those that were left-handed would use the right hand to do this, because it's the only way that someone facing you can strike their right cheek is with the back of your hand. So a blow to the right cheek without these contortions would have to be delivered with the back of the hand. The intention was not so much to do any type of harm at all. It was a reminder, and you were going to remember it because it did hurt some, but it was a deliberate effort to deflate someone, to put down or belittle someone, to give them the ultimate insult. That's what this is referring to when Christ says that. It's designed to be a blow that is to insult one's character. And at this time, and even again, I'm going to say it again today because it's still practiced over in the Mideast, it is considered to be one of the most serious personal offenses of the time. Now, Jesus was talking about our response to a personal insult or a calculated insult, not a physical attack. Again, I'm going to repeat that because that's how often this is used. It has nothing to do with a physical attack on your body. But so how are we to respond to this? Now, Proverbs 15:1 says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." This principle works in a variety of situations, and when we think about it, I don't think any of us would disagree with it. We face these type of situations daily. Someone cutting in front of you in a line at the grocery store, someone cutting you off in a car, someone at work gives you a harsh word, or someone treats you disrespectfully. You're going to encounter this quite regularly. So you see, if you lash out in anger when you are confronted with any of these situations, you know often that it is going to escalate. That's what is going to be the reaction to this. If you respond by being kind and generous to a person, which is the unexpected result, then you catch your antagonist off guard. And they, not quite knowing how to respond, will calm down a bit. Because they're usually, when someone does something like that, most of the time, they're already primed for your response when you think about it. If someone is going to say something insulting to you or something to demean you, or they're going to cut in line, most people know if they cut someone off in line, they're already primed and prepared for whatever your response is going to be, and they're ready to deal with it. So they're ready for your response to be the normal reaction, which would be negative. But when you respond kindly and graciously, then you catch them off guard. It's like referred to as pouring coals over their head. And this works in a marriage relationship, obviously. When you see tensions beginning to rise because someone's irritable and in a bad mood, you have a strategic decision to make. And it is a strategic decision because it could turn into war, right? So you have to be careful and think about what you're about to do. We've all done this and we know where it leads. You can respond in kindness and gentleness. Which works better? Kindness and gentleness. You could respond the other way, and you know where that's going to end up. If you respond in kind to someone's just impulsive, negative response, they're in a bad mood, had a bad day, and they snap at you, and you respond in kind, it's just going to get worse. And in the end, both parties pay the price. And when the conflict has already started, and you've impulsively shot your mouth off and said something wrong already, if you will immediately stop and then admit that you were wrong, if you catch yourself at least at that point, then you can get a handle on the situation and de-escalate it. And it shows the other party, as well as God and what it does for your heart, what you were really trying to accomplish, that it was a mistake. You acted impulsively. There was no intent behind it. It's hard to do that. There's something in us that makes us hate to admit when we are wrong. When everyone else knows it and we ourselves know it, we still have a hard time admitting that. But if we will be big enough and have the heart enough, even if we don't feel it at the time, once you start going through those motions and acting this way, it becomes part of your nature in response. If we make that first move, we will experience this secret, this positive power of what's talking about in Proverbs, and that's returning with a soft word. This works in the workplace when unrealistic demands or expectations are placed on you. A lot of times you'll have some unreasonable supervisor or a boss that they're flexing their authority over you. Many of us have encountered that. And a lot of times we call ruffles our feathers, makes our spines, just tingle with irritation, and we automatically look for ways to respond in a certain way that maybe get our point across but not get us fired. It's a fine edge there. But there's an easy way to deal with that, and that's the way Christ wants us to deal with it. It works in a school situation. I think many of us have been through that. When you have a demanding teacher, these implacable teachers who think that their class is the only one that counts, and so they give you these unrealistic, homework assignments that there's literally no way that you can get this accomplished when you got all these other classes to deal with. It works when you're unjustly accused for something, whether it be a friend, a family member, or even a stranger. It works when a coworker steals an idea that maybe you came up with and undermines you in front of your employer. You can become bitter or you can become better. It all depends on how you respond to it. In contrast, a desire for revenge and an attempt to retaliate often backfires. We usually end up getting the brunt of the worst of it in one way or another. And the worst of it being is what it does to our spirit and our soul. I read a story about, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, used to be a radio show. I don't know if it was a TV show because I still hear it sometimes. I listen to XM. It's channel 148, and what it is all these old radio shows. Tales of the Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, Dragnet. I mean, I listen to those I'm driving at work. They're pretty cool. But they had one that I had never heard before, and it was Amos and Andy. I don't know if you ever heard of that. That was a comedy. It was sort of like a sitcom on radio. And they had an episode where Andy, every day when he was going to work, he would pass by this guy, this big guy, and the guy would slap him on the chest really hard and just say hello and walk on by. And Andy was complaining to Amos about it, telling him that he had a way to resolve this situation. It had been going on for a week or so, and he was ticked off and was not going to put up with it anymore. He said he was going to get some dynamite and tape it to his chest, and when this guy slapped him in the chest, it'd blow his hand off. So we know what the result obviously was going to be. Andy was going to end up being just as hurt, if not worse, than the guy, right? And it's a stupid story, but the point it makes is relative, that we are often hurt more by our revenge and our thoughts of revenge than we do our target of this. There was another one that was more real. This is a true story that I read about, it was a year or two ago, and it stuck with me. But there was a man that had invited his wife to dinner. They were going to meet at a restaurant after he got off work. And so they were going to be in separate vehicles. And he came after work, working late, and he got to this restaurant that was on the edge of town, but the parking lot was so full that he had to park in the back corner, which it didn't have any street lights, and it was really dark back there. He parked, walked into the restaurant. He got a table for him and his wife, and she showed up a few minutes later, and they had a really nice dinner. And when they were getting ready to leave, she said that she needed to run to the restroom and that he could go ahead and leave, and she would meet him at home. And so he leaves the restaurant, gets out to his car, and someone had parked so close to him on the driver's side that he couldn't even get his door open wide enough to get inside his car. He was going to have to get on the passenger side and crawl over. Now, normally this guy is slow to anger, but it was so irritating to him, his initial reaction, which he responded to, was to do something he never would have thought of before. He never would have considered that he was capable of doing this, but he went to the other side of the car, pulled out his keys, and he keyed this car down the door. Now, I don't know if some of you do, I can tell by your expression, you know what keying a car is, but those of you don't, it's getting your key and holding it firmly in your hand, and you put it against the car, and you push hard as you can, and you drag it down the side of that car. And it goes to the metal, and it leaves a gouge. I mean, it's nasty. So he did this, gets back in his car, and he's driving off. He's real pleased with himself at first, and then he starts feeling bad about it. But in his mind, the guy deserved it, to do something like that. He gets home, few minutes later, about 15, 20 minutes later, his wife shows up, and she comes in, and she is visibly upset and had tears in her eyes. And she explains to her husband that something had happened to her car. And she doesn't know when. It may have been at the restaurant, but it was so dark she couldn't tell. She didn't remember seeing this before, but something had happened to the car that she was driving. The husband automatically thinks there's a hit and run in the parking lot. And he grabs his flashlight and goes out and inspects her car, and he can't find anything wrong with it. He does another circle and inspection, and there's nothing wrong with her car. And so she's just coming out to the house, and he explains to her, there's nothing wrong with the car. I've looked it over twice. He goes, I don't know what you're referring to. And she's shaking her head, and she goes, no. When I was getting ready to leave, my battery was dead. So I took your other car. And he panics, thinking somebody hit his other car. He goes running into the garage where it's kept, turns on the lights, and under that bright light, he starts walking around, and everything looks good. He gets over to the driver's side, and there is this long, deep scratch running down the side of his fully original, untouched, original paint, 1968 Pontiac GTO. This is his pride and joy, the second love of his life. And some people would say that's karma. Some people, I say that it is the hand of God teaching this man a lesson. But you see where I'm getting at. That is usually what happens with revenge. One way or the other, it's going to find its way and turn on you. The aspect of all of this is the way that we respond to people and the things that they do to us. The second posture that we adapt sometimes, or our response is when someone gives us a slight, is don't infringe on my rights. Now, the Christian response that and I want to explain that, is that we must learn to move past this type of attitude, this concern of ours, of our own rights. And that's in verse 40. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Now, we live in a society right now, and we see it all the time, and we know what I'm about to say, but we're so concerned with rights. We hear about human rights. We hear about women's rights, children's rights, workers' rights, gay rights, criminals' rights, victim rights. I mean, it goes on. It even goes to animals. People believe that they have rights, and in many cases, they not only plead for them, but they demand these rights. It's all about this entitlement attitude that we have developed. As Christians, we also think that we have rights, don't we? Many think that they have the right to success and prosperity, the right to a home and a family, the right to a good name, the right to be respected. There's nothing wrong with those things, you'd think. Well, do we have these rights as Christians? We don't. We don't have these rights as Christians. In fact, Christ is challenging us as believers to move past constantly thinking of our rights and rather think of our responsibilities to other people. The Apostle Paul, he deals with this directly about these rights. In his letter to the church at Corinth, and this is 1 Corinthians 9, 4 through 6, and verses 12 and 19, Paul says, do we have no right to eat and drink? Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord and Cephas? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? If others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? Nevertheless, we have not used these rights, but endure all things lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant, a bondservant to all, that I might win the more. Now, this last part of the statement is important because Paul's saying, I am a free man, but I am making myself a bondservant, depending on your translation, to all, that I might win the more. Now, that's important. What he's referring to himself there is as a bondservant. Paul declares that he is willing to give up his rights for the sake of reaching others with the gospel. And he describes himself as a bondservant, or in some of your translations it may say servant, but the word is the same that was translated from. As followers of Christ, we're supposed to be bondservants of Christ as well. Throughout the New Testament, the word bondservant and slave are used interchangeably. And it's applied metaphorically to someone devoted to Jesus Christ. We see it so many times. I think I'd counted it at 9 times and I quit counting it to see how often it was used. But Paul, Timothy, James, Peter, and Jude, those are just examples. They all describe themselves as bondservants of Christ. Romans 1:1, Paul, a bondservant of Christ, Jesus, called as an apostle, set apart from the gospel of God, and he goes on with his opening statement. Philippians 1:1, Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Jesus Christ. James 1:1, 2 Peter 1:1, Jude 1:1, they all are referring to themselves as bondservants of Christ. Biblically, a bondservant is usually translated from the Greek word doulos, which means one who is subservient to and entirely at the disposal of his or her master, a slave. In Roman times, even voluntary bondservants, slaves, had no rights whatsoever. As a matter of fact, they could be killed at their master's whim with complete impunity. That's the lack of rights that these slaves had. Now you have these apostles describing themselves as these very same type of people. They are giving up their rights and being slaves to Jesus Christ. If you're a bondservant to Christ, as you should be, as we should all desire to be, then we don't have those rights either, if we want to be like our examples. So we need to stop worrying that much about our worldly rights, and we need to be giving them up to become a bondservant of Christ. That should be our goal, not necessarily demanding and pleading and talking about all the time at work in these political situations and whatever we deal with of these rights that we have. What we should be more concerned with is serving our true master the way he wants us to. We want to live to hear those words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." That's what we want to hear. The third posture is, I'll do it if I have to or if I'm forced to, but that's all I'm going to do. Now, we encounter these situations often, and it'd be at work, it'd be at school, it'd be any situation where something is asked of us or expected of us or we're obligated to do. The Christian response is we must be willing to do way more than what is expected of us. And out of verse 41 and 42, Christ says, "And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2." So if we consider Jesus' words, we need to remember that in Galilee and Judea at this time was occupied countries by the Romans. Rome enforced its rule over the people they maintained these garrisons of Roman soldiers that were stationed all over the place. And according to Roman law, to the law then, a Roman soldier could require a Jewish citizen to carry his pack for a distance of 1 mile. He had no option in it. This was the law. The law obligated them to this first mile of servitude. An obvious biblical example that we can think of was Simon of Cyrene in Matthew. Remember when he was told to carry Christ's cross? He had no option in that. That could have been anyone. If they were a Jewish citizen, any one of those people could have been chosen and commanded to carry this cross. There are 2 ways to obey one of these commands by a soldier to carry his pack. One was grudging or resentful compliance, and the other was gracious and cheerful compliance. Now, grudging compliance is like the little boy who's told to go sit down in the corner at school. And he sits there with his arms crossed, and he says, "I may be sitting on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside." And that's a lot of times, that's our attitudes. We may do it. I'm complying. But in my heart and mind, I'm doing what I want to do. And you could do what you've been asked to do graciously and cheerfully, or you could do it grudgingly and resentfully. The first mile things, those are obligations. They're expected or required. Those are ordinary things. But the second mile was to be seen by Christ as an opportunity. That's the way he looked at it. An opportunity to go above and beyond, to exceed expectations, and the purpose being to glorify our Father in heaven. That was the point. And also to show our devotion to Jesus Christ. This demonstrates who we're willing to serve and sacrifice and benefit to others. It's a way of showing love. It is a fruit of our love, is to do this. The Lord was teaching that as you and I go down this road of life, we're to look at these tasks that we're given, and even the unfair ones, as opportunities to give glory to God. If we serve others cheerfully, we're reflecting the love of Christ. And we should look at this and look for these opportunities. The biblical reference that we're referring to, we hear it all the time. Going the extra mile. You've heard that. What's ironic is that you have atheists that use this phrase, and they really do not realize that this is a biblical origination. Going the extra mile, or going the second mile. You hear it all the time. Can you think in the Bible of a good example of this, going the extra mile? I mean, there's some good things in there. There's some that people have misinterpreted as that, and I'm not talking about the Good Samaritan, because he was not obligated to do anything. Do you remember the story of Rebekah and Isaac? Remember, Abraham was going to get a wife for Isaac, and he sent his servant out to go to where he had family, into their home country, and to look for him a wife. And this Eliezer was his servant. He prays to God, I'm condensing this, but he prays to God that to help him find a wife for Isaac. And he says, if I ask a woman at the well to give me a drink, she'll offer me the drink, and then she will also offer to water my camels. And let me know if that's the woman. And so that's what he's been praying for. Now, according to Middle Eastern hospitality, if you asked someone for a drink of water, they had to give it to you. But they probably would never even consider watering your camels. They just had to give you water. As Eliezer finishes praying, Rebekah walked to the well to put water in her jar. And after filling her jar with water, he turned to her and asked her for a drink. And I'm reading from the scripture. Rebekah said, "Drink, my lord." And she lowered the jar to give him a drink. And after giving him a drink, she added, "I'll draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking." So she ran back to the well to draw more water and drew enough for all his camels. Well, do you know how many camels that he had with him at the time? He had 10 of them. Okay, let me tell you something about these camels. First, notice in verse 21, it said that Eliezer gazed at her in silence. Why do you think he gazed at her in silence? Because I think he was astounded about what she had just offered to do. She was willing to go way above and beyond what was expected. You may say, well, I would have given him water. I might have given some water to his camels. But when you think of it, you're thinking of just turning on a faucet to get your water. This is not what she was doing at the time. She had to get this water from a well. And these buckets were maybe a gallon, maybe 2 gallons. Because they couldn't be much bigger for them to be cranking this stuff up from this well. So do you know that a thirsty camel can drink 20 to 30 gallons of water at a time in 10 minutes? I mean, you look that up. That's what they usually will do if they're thirsty. That's each. Rebekah came to this well in the cool of the evening when the other women were doing their watering. So she was also having to wait her turn to do these things. She would have taken her turn to get this water, serving 10 thirsty camels who were drinking 20 to 30 gallons apiece in this water. And that probably took her, how long do you think, to satisfy these camels? So just figuring it up. It's around 1.5 to 2 hours it would have taken her. And that's just the time, not the physical stress on her, to water all of these camels. She committed herself to almost 2 hours to this perfect stranger. She did far more than what she was asked of. And at the best, some of us might have given water, but we probably would have waved at him, wished him well. I doubt we would have given him one of our buckets or anything. How many of us would have actually been willing to, total stranger, spend 2 hours watering this guy's camels for him? This to me is an example of going the extra mile. And then our last fourth posture was anything but my money. And I think we might know where we're going with that. The Christian response would be, don't hesitate to give to those in need. And that's in verse 42. Verse 42 tells us that we're not to turn aside from those who ask to borrow from us. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Does that mean that we're supposed to give money to every panhandler who asks us for money? That we're supposed to give to individuals who we strongly suspect are going to be using this money for alcohol or drugs or something like that? It's not what it really means. It means that we should at least attempt to help the person, and some of us have done this, and us as a church have done this. We've had people come here and they've asked us for money, and we've been suspectful based on some signs and things that were pretty obvious to us what they were going to use the money for. But what we did do was just go and buy them something to eat. We offered to do something else, but we are not going to, help this person continue on with their habit or whatever their vices are. But we should try to help them. There are a few things in life that reveal to other people and to ourselves as much about us as what we're willing to do and what it takes to separate us from our money. That's usually a big indicator of the type of person you are. Jesus continues his teaching in verse 43. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. We are to bless others as we have been blessed. Often, we are to give as we've been given, because we need to keep in mind that many times we've been physically and monetarily blessed for the purpose of being able to give to others. But we don't often look at it that way. We don't take the time. Helping those in need is a fruit of love. And we're to have this for everyone. Now, C.S. Lewis, the Christian author, I don't know how many of you read much of his stuff. Very interesting. I love his stuff. But he explained the principle found in these verses, and he wrote this. The rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you already did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the greatest secrets. When you're behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him even more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. The difference between a Christian and a worldly man is not that the worldly man has only affections or likings and the Christian has only charity. The worldly man treats certain people kindly because he likes them. The Christian, trying to treat everyone kindly, finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on, including people he would not even have imagined himself liking in the beginning. Now, C.S. Lewis. And Jesus summarizes his teachings of all this in verse 45. He says, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on evil and also on the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So according to Jesus, this test of perfection, this is a test of maturity. It's the capacity to love those who do not love you. So, in conclusion, when we are to move past this posturing and these attitudes that the world expects of us and that they consider normal, we are to take insults with grace and to respond with kindness. We must learn to move past this concern and this focus on our own personal rights and think of actually those of others. Think of the love that we have for others, and not to have this attitude of entitlement that everyone is embracing nowadays. We must be willing to do much more than is expected of us. And it's not just for the sake of others, but it's because when we do more than what is expected, we're doing that for God. We're showing him what type of person we are and how dedicated we are to him. But it gives an example to those around us. And when they see you always exceeding expectations time and time again, they may begin to wonder, why? What drives this person? And then they may come to you. It may give you an opportunity to share the gospel. And then fourthly, we're not to hesitate ever to give to those in need, in one way or another, at least address their concerns. Christ makes all this clear to us, again, in the command that I'm going to repeat every time that I'm up here. And he tells us, if we love him, we will obey his and follow his commands. And in return, we will be loved by the Father. So if you have any concerns or requests for prayers or want to come forward this morning, this is also the opportunity we use for this when we come up for our invitation.